his new girlfriend sat at our table boasting that she was better than me. 10 minutes later, she realized I was the new owner of the restaurant she worked in. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered. Warm lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and the soft hum of conversation creating a refined yet inviting atmosphere. Crestview Bistro had always been a place of quiet elegance, a sanctuary for those who appreciated fine dining without the chaos of the city beyond its glass walls. Tonight, however, it felt different. I hadn't been here in over a year, not since my life had taken an unexpected turn. Back then, I sat at one of these tables, caught up in dreams of a future that never came to pass. But I wasn't that person anymore. Thank you for being part of this journey. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and quiet victory, consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share more empowering narratives. Stay strong and focused. Tonight I walked in alone, not out of loneliness but by choice. This was my night, a quiet celebration of success that had once seemed impossible. No company was needed, no validation required. Just me, my thoughts, and the satisfaction of knowing that I had built something worth celebrating. As the host led me to my table, I took in the familiar surroundings. The grand chandelier above cast a golden glow over the room, catching in the delicate rim of my wine glass as I settled into my seat. The air smelled of seared rosemary and slow-cooked garlic, a reminder of the exquisite menu I had come to appreciate. Then I heard his voice. I froze. Not outwardly but internally, as if time had hesitated just for a moment. Daniel. The sound of his laughter carried effortlessly through the room, threading itself into the refined ambience like an unwelcome interruption. And then another voice joined his. A woman's. I forced myself to exhale, releasing the sudden tension in my shoulders. This wasn't unexpected. Daniel had moved on, quickly, publicly, and with purpose. He wasn't the type to sit in solitude reflecting on past mistakes. No, he was the kind who filled his life with distractions, with temporary validation. And tonight I was about to meet the latest one. Oh, I just love this place. The woman's voice floated through the air, clear and sweet, tinged with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. I didn't turn immediately. Instead, I reached for my glass, taking a slow sip before finally allowing my gaze to drift across the room. There he was. Daniel sat at a table just a few feet away, his posture as relaxed as ever, that signature smirk resting easily on his face. He leaned slightly toward the woman beside him, Vanessa, if I recalled correctly, who was currently laughing at something he had said. She was striking, undeniably so. High cheekbones, flawless skin, and the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads. She dressed well, carried herself with ease. She was exactly the type Daniel would choose. And she was looking directly at me. Oh, she mused, tilting her head slightly. I think I recognize you. I offered a polite, impassive smile. Do you? Daniel's gaze followed hers, and for the first time that evening, his amusement faltered. I saw the moment of recognition flash in his eyes, the way his fingers curled slightly around his drink. He wasn't expecting to see me here. That already was a win. Vanessa, however, didn't seem to notice the shift in his demeanor. She leaned forward slightly, a playful smile dancing on her lips. Yes, now I remember. You're Daniel's ex, aren't you? The word ex hung in the air, deliberate, weighted. I could have responded in many ways. I could have ignored her, brushed it off, or laughed. But instead, I set my glass down carefully, holding her gaze with quiet confidence. That's one way to put it. Daniel cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his seat. Vanessa, let's not. But she wasn't interested in his input. She was enjoying herself. Oh, don't worry, she said, waving a hand dismissively. It's just funny, you know? I mean, life works out in such strange ways. I arched an eyebrow. Strange how? Her smile widened, but there was an edge to it now. Something sharper, more calculated. Well, she mused, people change. They move on. Some of us just fit better. Daniel exhaled quietly, shaking his head as if trying to stop whatever was happening before it escalated. But I wasn't upset. Not even close. I had walked into this restaurant with a quiet purpose, content to keep to myself, to enjoy the moment without interference. But now, with Vanessa sitting across from me, so eager to prove something, I saw an opportunity. Not for anger. Not for pettiness. But for something far better. Interesting perspective, I said smoothly, lifting my glass once more. Vanessa seemed to take my lack of reaction as a victory. She straightened, reaching for her own drink as she cast Daniel a knowing look. I mean, I can't blame him, she continued, her voice carrying just enough for nearby tables to catch fragments of the conversation. Some things just weren't meant to last. And honestly, I get it. Some people just have more to offer. Daniel shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. But Vanessa was too caught up in her performance to notice. And then the moment happened. A waiter approached, leaning in slightly toward me with practiced professionalism. Ma'am, would you like us to prepare your private seating area? Silence. For the first time that evening, Vanessa hesitated. She blinked, glancing between me and the waiter, her confidence flickering for the briefest second. Private seating, she repeated, her voice noticeably softer. I smiled just enough. No need, I replied smoothly. I'm comfortable here. But it was already too late. The shift had occurred. Vanessa looked at Daniel, expecting an explanation. He said nothing. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the slow realization creeping in. Wait, she said finally, what does he mean, private seating? I set my glass down, taking my time before responding, letting the anticipation build. Oh, I said, tilting my head slightly, he didn't tell you? Vanessa's expression darkened. Tell me what? I met Daniel's gaze, watching as his jaw tightened just slightly, a tell he had never quite mastered. Then I turned back to Vanessa, offering her the final blow. I own this restaurant. The weight of those words crashed over the table, swallowing the last remnants of her confidence. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Daniel exhaled, his expression unreadable. Me. I simply smiled, picking up my fork as if nothing had happened at all. Because the best revenge was always served effortlessly. Vanessa's glass hovered inches from her lips, her fingers tightening around the delicate stem as my words sank in. I had given her just enough time to process, to feel the weight of what I had just revealed. I own this restaurant. The flicker of confusion in her eyes turned to something sharper, something unsettled. She looked at Daniel, expecting him to deny it, to scoff and wave it off as some elaborate joke. But he didn't. Instead, he remained completely silent. The tension between them became palpable. The playful confidence she had worn so effortlessly before was slipping, her smile faltering just enough for me to catch it. I reached for my fork, casually twirling the silverware between my fingers before taking a deliberate bite of my meal. Unbothered. In control. You own it, she repeated as if saying the words out loud might somehow make them untrue. I lifted my gaze to meet hers, letting the silence stretch just a little longer before responding. That's right. Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple as though he were suddenly burdened with a headache. Vanessa, just let it go. Let it go. Of course he'd want that. He never did like confrontation, especially when he wasn't the one in control of it. But Vanessa wasn't the type to let anything go. Not when her pride was on the line. Wait, so you're telling me, she started, her voice just a touch too loud, but she stopped herself, swallowing her disbelief. Her expression shifted, her lips pressing into a thin line before she forced a laugh. It was hollow, brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. Well, that's unexpected. Unexpected. I almost smiled. As it was. She straightened in her seat, quickly gathering herself, but the shift in the room was undeniable. The quiet murmurs from nearby tables had faded, replaced by subtle glances and stolen looks in our direction. People were watching. Daniel knew it too. His jaw was tight, his grip on his drink just a little firmer than before. I could see it now, the calculations running through his mind. How long had I known? When had I bought the restaurant? Was this planned? He was searching for some angle, some way to frame this in his favor. But there wasn't one. Vanessa, however, wasn't ready to retreat. Not yet. Well, good for you, she finally said, the forced brightness in her tone betraying the storm brewing underneath. I mean, that's impressive, really. I had no idea you were involved in this kind of business. She was trying to recover, trying to reclaim even a fraction of the control she had lost. I let out a small hum, dabbing my napkin against my lips before answering. I suppose there are a lot of things you don't know about me. Daniel shot me a look, a silent warning I ignored. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, exhaling with exaggerated ease. Well, she said, offering another smile, I guess this means we'll be seeing a lot of each other. It was a weak attempt at reclaiming control, an unspoken challenge that I found more amusing than intimidating. Not necessarily, I replied smoothly, watching the subtle shift in her expression. Her smile flickered. What do you mean? I tilted my head slightly as if considering something. I have a certain standard for the kind of employees I keep around. I like my staff to treat customers with kindness, professionalism, respect. Pause. Just enough to make her squirm. Wouldn't you agree, Vanessa? Her posture stiffened. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the direction I was taking this. All right, enough, he muttered, clearly frustrated. No need to make this a thing. I glanced at him, amused. Now he wanted to intervene. Now, when it was Vanessa feeling the discomfort instead of me. But I wasn't done. Of course, I said, turning my attention back to Vanessa. I'd hate to see anyone put in an uncomfortable position. That wouldn't be fair. Vanessa swallowed hard. She was beginning to understand. This wasn't just about a title. It wasn't about ownership. It was about power. And she had just walked headfirst into a situation where she had none. A waiter approached, setting a fresh drink in front of me with quiet efficiency. The small gesture, that unspoken acknowledgement of authority, was not lost on Vanessa. I picked up my glass, swirling the liquid inside slowly before taking a sip. You know, I mused, my tone light, I never did get around to asking, how long have you been working here, Vanessa? She froze. Daniel let out a sharp breath. Come on, that's enough. But Vanessa was already too deep. She had chosen this game. I was merely making sure she played it to the end. 6 months, she admitted, her voice quieter now. 6 months, I repeated, letting the words settle. That's quite a while. Her nails dug into her napkin, knuckles whitening as she forced another weak smile. Yes, well, it's just temporary. You know how it is. I did. But I also knew something else. She had walked into this restaurant tonight thinking she was at the top, believing she had the upper hand. She had mocked me, belittled me, all while sitting in a restaurant she didn't even know belonged to me. No. Now she had to sit in that realization. Of course, I said, offering her a knowing smile. I'm sure it is. Silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Then ever so slightly Vanessa's hands trembled. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I caught it. And that was enough. I didn't need to do anything more. Not yet. Because the real game was just beginning. And for the first time tonight Vanessa knew it too. Vanessa's silence stretched, her once effortless confidence now brittle, barely holding together under the weight of realization. Her fingers still clutched the napkin in her lap, her knuckles slightly pale. I could feel the quiet hum of the restaurant around us, the low murmurs of conversation, the occasional clink of silverware. But at our table, silence reigned. Daniel, seated beside her, shifted uncomfortably. He had seen this coming before she did. His instincts had warned him the moment I spoke, but now he was stuck in a situation he couldn't easily navigate. Vanessa cleared her throat, forcing a small laugh. Well, that's surprising, she said, but her voice had lost its edge, her confidence cracking ever so slightly. I suppose it is, I replied, my tone even. Calm, collected, controlled. She straightened her posture, trying to regain some semblance of composure. I mean, that's great for you, she added, offering a strained smile. Owning a restaurant like this must be a big deal. It was an attempt at civility, at softening the embarrassment that had already set in. But I wasn't interested in making this easier for her. It is, I agreed, pausing just long enough for the tension to build. Then I took another sip of my drink, letting the ice shift in the glass. And I take my work very seriously. Her smile flickered. He could hear it. The weight in my words. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting toward Vanessa as if urging her to stop talking. But she wasn't listening. She was still trying to recover, still trying to win. I had no idea you were even interested in this kind of business, she said, tilting her head slightly. Last I heard you were. She stopped herself. She realized too late that she had nothing to say. The last she had heard? The last she had assumed? That I had been left with nothing? That I had crumbled after Daniel moved on? That my life had stalled while they thrived? I let the moment linger, watching her fight to find a way to salvage this conversation. It's funny, I said, my voice smooth, effortless. People always think they know everything about someone until they don't. Her shoulders tensed. She knew exactly what I meant. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. All right, I think we should just... Oh, don't leave on my account, I interrupted, offering him a small smile. I wanted them to stay. I wanted Vanessa to sit in this. To feel it. She had walked into this restaurant assuming she held the upper hand. Now she was seated across from the person she had mocked minutes ago, realizing she had been dining in my restaurant. And she had no idea what to do with that information. Actually, I mused, glancing toward the manager standing discreetly near the bar. Why don't I send something over? On the house. The suggestion landed with a quiet, unspoken weight. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward Daniel, then back to me. Oh, that's really not. I insist, I cut in smoothly. A small gesture. After all, my staff takes pride in treating our guests with the utmost care. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Biz now. He was just another guest. Just another person seated in my restaurant at my table under my roof. I turned to the manager who had already been watching carefully. He understood without me needing to explain. With a simple nod, he moved swiftly, calling over a waiter. Within moments, a carefully curated plate of appetizers was placed before Vanessa and Daniel. Exquisite presentation, fine ingredients, but the message was unmistakable. I wasn't offering generosity. I was offering a reminder. The restaurant, the staff, the very meal in front of them, they were all at my discretion. Vanessa stared at the plate for a moment before lifting her gaze to me, searching for something in my expression. What was she looking for? Pity? A sign that I was willing to ease the discomfort? She wouldn't find it. Instead, I simply smiled. Enjoy. Daniel let out a small sigh, reaching for his drink. He took a slow sip, his fingers tapping against the glass. He knew there was no recovering from this. But Vanessa? Vanessa still hadn't touched her food. The once lively sparkle in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by something far more fragile. It was subtle, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her fingers curled around her napkin. The reality had set in. She had walked into this restaurant believing she was above me. Now she realized she had spent the evening unknowingly walking through my space, belittling someone who held all the power. And the worst part? She couldn't do anything about it. I let the silence stretch, giving her time to sit with the weight of it. Then finally I reached for my purse, rising to my feet. It was nice catching up, I said, adjusting the strap on my shoulder. But I have other business to attend to. Vanessa lifted her gaze, watching me carefully. She was waiting for something, perhaps one final jab, one last comment to remind her of where we stood. But I didn't need to say anything else. I had already won. Instead, I gave a small nod to the staff, who immediately moved to pull out my chair, escorting me toward the exit with the respect afforded to someone in my position. I didn't glance back. I didn't need to. I already knew what I would see. Vanessa sitting frozen in her chair, Daniel rubbing his temple, the weight of the evening pressing down on them both. By the time I reached the door, the crisp night air greeted me, carrying the quiet sounds of the city beyond. The moment I stepped outside, I felt it. The finality of it all. Vanessa had walked into that restaurant thinking she had something to prove. She left understanding that she never stood a chance. And Daniel? He had just learned that walking away from me hadn't been the victory he once thought it was. Because in the end I hadn't lost anything at all. I had gained control. And that was the best revenge of all. As I stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around me, bringing a crisp finality to the evening. The city hummed with distant sounds, honking cars, chatter from nearby restaurants, the rhythmic footsteps of late-night wanderers. Yet amidst the familiar noise, all I could hear was the quiet satisfaction settling deep in my chest. Vanessa had walked into that restaurant with a sense of superiority, confident that she was untouchable. She had no idea that her entire evening was spent under my authority. And now the real work was about to begin. The next morning I arrived at Crestview Bistro before opening hours, as I always did. The scent of fresh bread lingered in the air, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee as my team prepped for another busy day. The soft hum of conversation from the kitchen blended with the clinking of dishes as chefs lined up ingredients, carefully measuring and chopping under the watchful eye of the head chef. I moved through the space with quiet confidence, stopping occasionally to check inventory, review reports, and make minor adjustments to the upcoming week's schedule. Routine, efficient, orderly. And then she walked in. Vanessa. She hesitated near the entrance, shifting uncomfortably as she adjusted the strap of her bag. Gone was the effortless confidence from the night before. Today she looked unsure, her usual bravado replaced with something more subdued. I didn't acknowledge her right away. Instead, I let her feel it, the weight of reality settling in. The same staff she had once ordered around with ease were now moving past her with polite indifference, offering nods but nothing more. No friendly chatter. No favoritism. Just quiet professionalism. She wasn't special anymore. Finally, I turned, meeting her gaze. Vanessa. You're early. Her posture stiffened slightly. I always come in before my shift starts. I arched a brow. Good. That means we can go over a few things before you begin. She swallowed but nodded. She knew she had no choice. I led her to the back office. The quiet clicking of my heels against the tile the only sound between us. Inside, I gestured for her to sit while I took my place behind the desk. I've been reviewing staff performance, I said smoothly, scanning through a few notes. And I've noticed some inconsistencies in certain areas. Vanessa sat rigid, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. What do you mean? I glanced up, meeting her eyes. Your responsibilities. Your service approach. Your attitude toward both guests and staff. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. It seems there's been a pattern of selective effort, I continued, tapping my pen against the desk. Some guests receive excellent service. Others, well, let's just say the experience is noticeably different. She knew exactly what I was referring to. All the times she had treated customers based on her mood, her preference, or her personal opinions. I expect consistency from my employees, I said firmly. No exceptions. He forced a nod. Understood. Good, I said, closing the folder in front of me. Starting today there will be some changes. Her fingers twitched slightly. She had been expecting this. But she had no idea just how much things were about to shift. From now on, I said, leaning back slightly, you'll be assigned to the busiest sections. Peak hours, high-traffic tables, full-service requirements. Her eyes widened slightly. She had always managed to avoid the most demanding shifts, using favoritism and social connections to keep her workload light. That luxury was gone. You'll also be assisting in back-of-house duties when necessary. Dish rotations, stock refills, prep assistance. Her lips parted as if to protest, but she quickly shut them, realizing she couldn't afford to argue. And finally, I added, deliberately slowing my words, customer satisfaction reports will be strictly monitored. One negative review due to poor service? It will be addressed immediately. The message was clear. No more shortcuts. No more favoritism. Every action would have consequences. Vanessa swallowed hard. I understand. I smiled. Excellent. I'll see you on the floor. With that, I dismissed her, watching as she rose from her seat, shoulders a little tighter, steps a little slower. This wasn't the same Vanessa who had sat across from me last night, basking in her arrogance. That version of her no longer existed. The shift started exactly as I planned. The lunch rush came fast, waves of customers filling every seat. Servers moved seamlessly, taking orders, balancing trays, ensuring tables were attended with precision. And Vanessa? She was overwhelmed. She had never truly worked a full-capacity shift before. Not like this. She had always maneuvered her way out of high-pressure service, finding excuses, pulling favors. But today, there was no way out. I watched from a distance as she struggled to keep pace, her movements growing more frantic with each passing minute. Balancing multiple tables. Remembering complex orders. Navigating the demands of high-paying customers. Every mistake was noticed. Every delay tested the patience of those she served. And then, it happened. A spilled drink. Vanessa, moving too quickly, knocked over a glass of fresh juice, the bright liquid cascading over the pristine white tablecloth. Silence. The customer, a sharply dressed businessman, lifted his gaze, unimpressed. Vanessa's face paled. For the first time she understood what it felt like to be truly powerless. I'm so sorry, she stammered, reaching for napkins, but the damage was already done. The manager was at the table instantly, handling the situation with practiced ease, offering the guest a fresh order, ensuring everything was corrected without delay. And Vanessa? She stood there, hands shaking slightly, realizing just how exposed she was. I didn't intervene. Not yet. Instead, I let her clean up the mess herself, let her feel the weight of every frustrated glance, every whispered comment. This wasn't cruelty. This was balance. For every time she had dismissed a guest's complaint. For every server she had treated unfairly. For every moment she had assumed she was untouchable. Now she knew what it felt like to be the one struggling to keep up. By the time the shift ended, Vanessa looked exhausted. Drained in a way she had never been before. She pulled off her apron with shaky hands, exhaling sharply as she leaned against the back counter. I approached slowly, stopping just beside her. "Long day?" I asked, my tone neutral. She didn't look at me right away. When she did, her eyes held something different. Not defiance. Not arrogance. Understanding. For the first time she knew she had been playing an entirely different game this whole time. I smiled, giving her a small nod. "See you tomorrow." Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the aftermath of her own choices. And that was the real beginning of her lesson. The next morning I arrived at Crestview Bistro just as the early sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden hue across the polished tables. The restaurant was still quiet, the air filled with the aroma of fresh-baked bread and slow-brewed coffee. I walked past the kitchen, exchanging brief nods with the staff as they prepared for the day. The rhythm of the place felt steady, orderly, except for one thing. Vanessa. She stood near the back, apron loosely tied around her waist, her shoulders stiff with exhaustion. Her usual arrogance had dissolved into something closer to weariness, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked unsure. It was clear, yesterday had changed something in her. I approached the counter where she stood, reviewing the day's reservations. I didn't acknowledge her right away. Not out of cruelty, but to let her feel it. The absence of special treatment. The loss of privilege. The understanding that she was no longer above anyone here. "Morning," I finally said, keeping my tone neutral. She looked up quickly as if surprised that I had even addressed her. "Morning," she murmured, shifting awkwardly. I glanced at the schedule in my hands. "We're expecting a busy lunch rush today. You'll be in the main section again." A flicker of something crossed her face. A mix of resignation and quiet frustration. She knew better than to argue, but I could tell she wanted to. "Understood," she said, forcing the words out with effort. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a start. As the day unfolded, I watched her closely. She moved through her shifts differently now, less entitled, more careful. She made fewer mistakes, double-checking orders, keeping her posture straight even when the stress of peak hours weighed on her. She was learning slowly but surely what it meant to work for something instead of expecting it to be handed to her. But that wasn't the only thing shifting. Because Daniel had begun to change too. He had always been good at keeping up appearances. Charming in just the right way, saying the right things, smiling at the right moments. But over the past few days I had noticed something different in him. His presence at the restaurant had become less frequent. His text to Vanessa. Brief, transactional. And Vanessa? She had started noticing too. I saw it in the way she glanced at her phone between shifts, her brows furrowing when she received nothing in return. The way she stiffened when Daniel did show up, only for him to offer her a brief, distracted greeting before turning his attention elsewhere. He was starting to understand. That just like she had replaced me, she too was replaceable. And that realization was far more powerful than anything I could have orchestrated. By the time the dinner rush arrived, I could tell Vanessa was unraveling. She moved slower, her responses to customers losing the forced cheerfulness she had tried to maintain. And when Daniel finally arrived, sliding into his usual seat near the bar, she barely looked at him. But I did. I had spent years learning to read him, understanding the subtle shifts in his body language, the small tells that revealed when he was losing interest. No. That was exactly what was happening. He barely looked at Vanessa. Instead, his gaze wandered, to the host, to the waitresses, to anything that wasn't her. Vanessa saw it too. She clenched the tray she held just a little too tightly, her breathing controlled but unsteady. For the first time she was on the other side of things. And it was tearing her apart. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When her shift ended, she didn't linger. She pulled off her apron, barely acknowledging the other servers as she grabbed her bag and headed for the exit. But just as she reached the door, Daniel caught her wrist. "Leaving already?" he asked, his tone light but his grip firm. I watched from a distance, unnoticed. "I'm tired," Vanessa said, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Come on, don't be like that. You've been acting weird lately." Her lips pressed together. I've been busy. So what? Daniel leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. This job is temporary. You don't actually care about this place, right? She hesitated. And in that hesitation I saw everything. For the first time she wasn't sure. Because what if this wasn't temporary? What if this was all she had left? Daniel must have sensed it too, because his expression changed. Boredom creeping in, disinterest settling into his posture. Anyway, he muttered, releasing her wrist. I'll call you later. Vanessa nodded, but the moment she turned away I knew. She wasn't going to wait for that call. Not anymore. Later that night, as I locked up the restaurant, I found Vanessa sitting outside on one of the benches near the entrance. She wasn't crying. She wasn't fuming. She was just quiet. I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. Long day. She let out a humorless laugh. You could say that. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because for the first time, Vanessa wasn't looking at me like an opponent. She was looking at me like someone who understood. I thought I had it all figured out, she admitted, staring at the pavement. I thought I knew exactly how things worked. I nodded, letting her process it in her own time. But I didn't, she continued, exhaling slowly. I thought I was better than this place. Better than this job. Better than... She stopped herself. Better than me. She didn't say it, but we both knew. I straightened, watching as she rubbed her hands together, her confidence shattered into something far more human. You know the funny thing, she said, shaking her head. I think I actually like this job. I smiled. I know. And I did. Because true revenge was never about destruction. It was about revelation. And tonight, Vanessa had finally seen herself for who she really was. Not a replacement. Not someone superior. Just a person learning the hard way. I pushed off the doorway, giving her a small nod before turning to leave. See you tomorrow, Vanessa. She didn't argue. She didn't scoff. He just nodded back. Yeah. See you tomorrow. And for the first time since I had met her, she finally meant it. The next morning, Crestview Bistro felt different. The same aroma of fresh-baked bread filled the air, the same crisp linen adorned the tables, but there was a shift. A subtle undercurrent that signaled change. And I knew exactly why. Vanessa was already inside when I arrived, tying her apron with steady hands. Her usual hesitation was gone. There was no reluctance in her movements. No quiet rebellion against the structure of the place. She had accepted where she stood. Not just here in the restaurant, but in her own life. She glanced up when I walked past, and for the first time since she had started working here, she didn't look at me like a challenge. She simply nodded. And that was all I needed. The lunch rush came and went, and I watched as Vanessa moved with a new kind of confidence. She still wasn't perfect. Her hands faltered on occasion, her pace slowed when things got overwhelming. But she never ran from it. She never tried to shift the blame, never expected someone else to pick up the slack. She faced it head-on. I had no intention of making things easy for her. Growth came from struggle, and she was finally embracing it. But then something unexpected happened. Daniel walked in. His usual smirk was firmly in place, but there was something else. An edge of frustration. He had been ignoring Vanessa for days, keeping his distance just enough to remind her of his control. But now it seemed he wasn't quite as comfortable with the idea of her not chasing after him. I watched as Vanessa stiffened when she saw him, but this time she didn't fold. He straightened. And for the first time he noticed. Vanessa, he greeted smoothly, sliding into a seat at the bar. She didn't turn right away. She finished wiping down a table, stacking the menus neatly before walking over. No rush. No urgency. Daniel, she said simply, her tone unreadable. That threw him off. Been busy? He asked, watching her carefully. You could say that, she replied. He leaned forward slightly. You've been distant. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Funny. I could say the same about you. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Vanessa wasn't playing her role anymore. She wasn't waiting for his attention. She wasn't grasping for his approval. She was standing on her own. You working another shift tonight? He asked, his voice casual, but there was a sharpness underneath. Vanessa met his gaze, and for the first time I saw it. A spark of realization. That he wasn't offering anything. He was testing her. To see if she would drop everything for him. To see if she was still the same woman he had once controlled. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No. I have plans. Daniel blinked. Plans? He shrugged. Yeah. Turns out I actually like working here. Silence stretched between them. Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. Come on, Vanessa. You don't belong here. Stop. It's not you. She tilted her head slightly, considering his words. You're right, she said after a moment. It wasn't me. But maybe it is now. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely caught off guard. Because Vanessa, the woman who had once basked in his attention, who had once clung to his every word, was finally letting go. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Daniel left without saying much else, and I watched as Vanessa let out a slow, measured breath. She turned toward me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Not as rivals. Not as enemies. But as two women who had both learned their lessons. You knew, didn't you? She finally asked, a ghost of a smile on her lips. I raised an eyebrow. Knew what? That this was always how it was going to end. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. No, Vanessa. That was up to you. She exhaled, nodding slowly. And then for the first time she smiled. Not out of spite. Not out of arrogance. But out of understanding. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into my restaurant that night, full of empty pride and misplaced confidence. She had been humbled. And more importantly, she had grown. That night as I closed up the restaurant, I didn't feel the usual weight of revenge. Because this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about learning. Vanessa had finally learned what it meant to stand on her own, to work for something instead of expecting it to be handed to her. And Daniel, he had learned something too. That he was never the prize. That without control he had nothing. And that perhaps was the greatest lesson of all. I stepped outside, inhaling the cool night air, and allowed myself one last look at the restaurant. The place where it all began and where it all ended. Not with destruction. Not with ruin. But with balance. And as I walked away I realized. That was all I ever really wanted. Closure. And I had finally found it.